The law was everything, and unfortunately that also was part of the problem. So let me give a little context here. I've referred to the Pharisees as the ultimate bad guys. That's not really fair. The Sadducees were the ultimate bad guys. All things considered, our Lord probably had more in common with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. It's fascinating how little he engages the Sadducees. They are barely mentioned in the Gospels. The Pharisees are mentioned all the time. Why is that? Well, the Pharisees took their faith seriously, and they took the law of Moses seriously, and perhaps too seriously. The Pharisees believed in the immortality of the soul, in angels. They believed in the importance of adhering to the law. They resented the yoke that the Romans imposed upon the nation of Israel. They waited for someone to deliver them from that. The Sadducees, however, well, how to describe the Sadducees? The Sadducees are basically the first century equivalent of those who are Catholic privately, but something else publicly. I'm personally opposed, but that's a good description of the Sadducees. The Sadducees did not believe in the immortality of the soul or in angels. They didn't really mind the Romans. They worked with them a whole lot. The Sadducees were most interested in maintaining their political power. That was their greatest concern. It wasn't adherence to the law. It wasn't faith and devotion. And so if our Lord does not engage the Sadducees, it's simply because, honestly, they weren't worth his time. Because there was really nothing to engage there. There was no there, as we might say. But the Pharisees did take the faith seriously. And because they did, our Lord knew that there was something there to engage. And because they did, he perhaps got even more frustrated with them. It's a good lesson to us because at the end of the day, we're all Pharisees. The Pharisees believed that if they, in sort of a mercantile relationship with God, if I do this, then you have to do that. They believed that they could do it all themselves. And we are forever in danger of falling into that same trap spiritually. But most of our Lord's teachings and controversies really are targeted at the Pharisees. It's extraordinary. The prodigal son, which is really the parable of the older brother. We call it the prodigal son. Our Lord didn't say, okay, now I'm going to tell you the parable of the prodigal son. We gave it that name. But it's really the parable of the rotten older brother. And St. Luke makes it very clear. He told it because of the Pharisees. It's a warning to them. And so for any of you who don't like that parable or don't like how the older brother is treated, okay, that's a warning. Or the parable of the laborers in the field. They're sent out from one time of day to another, and then the laborers who came last in the day get the same pay as those who came first. Yeah, and none of us like that parable. Right? It's directed at the Pharisees as well. So to sum up, the Pharisees got a lot of things right. And so when we hear about them in the Gospels, we shouldn't imagine in our mind the bad guy music. What we should think is, well, this is directed at me too. They got a lot of things right. The Pharisees were the kind of people who would do a lot because of their faith. They would go to Mass in the evening and then go to a dinner and hear a priest from Northern Virginia speak. But they got a lot of things wrong. So let's first, well, it can all be summarized this way. The Pharisees reveal to us that the law is good. And at the same time, the law is not enough. So first, let's talk a little bit about the law as good. It's not for nothing that the Catholic Church has had so many lawyers in her tradition, and even numbers many lawyers among her saints. St. Thomas More is only the most famous. There's also Thomas à Becket, Charles Borromeo, Francis de Sales, Alphonsus Liguori, Jose Maria Escrivá. And in doing a little bit of research on this, I found St. Theophilus the lawyer. Okay, that's his name. It's St. Theophilus the lawyer. So you can do more research on him. The Catholic view of the law is that it is a good, because society is a good, because we are meant to live in community, in relation with one another. But in order for us to do that peacefully and virtuously, we need some assistance. We need that external assistance of the law. And so the law is to serve the good of society in that way, so that we have, as I mentioned in the homily, we have a stable society in which we can really pursue that moral excellence to which we are called, the holiness to which each of us is called. We don't accept the modernist view that the human person is just an atomized individual and we'd be better off if we were just all alone. We feel like that sometimes, granted, right? But we are really meant to live in relation with one another. And the law is at the service of that. And that's why we see it as a good. But more important than this, the church has the conviction that there is a law, not just that laws serve a purpose and a good one, but that there is a law, meaning a way that we ought to live our lives as human persons. That there is a standard to which we ought to conform ourselves. We call this the natural law traditionally. There is this conviction that we know how we should act, and we're always striving to conform ourselves to that. And I emphasize this because I think what we're witnessing today is lapsing into really a certain lawlessness. And by lawlessness, I don't mean that there are scoff laws, or there are these people running red lights or jaywalking with impunity, that sort of thing. There have always been people who break the law. What I mean, and please God, it's somewhat at an end right now, is attorneys general who will not enforce laws that they took an oath of office to enforce. In the legal realm, that's what it looks like, or a disrespect for the rule of law. But then more deeply and more broadly, we as a society have lost a sense of what it means to be human. And perhaps even worse than that there is an authentic way to be human, that we are all striving to live that way. Now we look at ourselves and we don't know who we are. We don't even know if we're male or female anymore. It's the Gloucester case, which, please God, won't make it up to the court now, won't have to. We are confused about the very identity of man and woman, what it means to be human. This is a great, great error that we have in our society. And so when we speak of the law as good, we mean, first of all, that law that is written in our hearts, as St. Paul says. That law that speaks to each of us in our conscience and bids us to avoid evil and to do good. And the properly formed conscience is always pointing us to a nobler way of living, a holier way of living. And then this also helps us to understand why the positive law, the laws that man passes, are so important, is because they help to give expression to that. They help to give expression to how we ought to live with one another so that we can live not just getting along. It's a very low bar. And unfortunately, this is most people's view of freedom. That freedom means, my freedom the freedom to swing my fist ends, when it hits your face. Maybe you've heard that silly definition of freedom before. That's a very low bar for freedom. No, what we mean by freedom is the ability to do what we have been created to do, the ability to do what we are called to do, the ability to do what we ought. And that is freedom for moral excellence and freedom ultimately for holiness. And this is what our laws really should serve, is to cultivate the kind of society that is pointed in that direction. Now, I don't mean that we have to pass into law all Catholic Church teaching and require everybody to worship the Eucharist, but simply that in our laws, we should have this sense of the truth about the human person and the striving for that, so that the laws outside of us will help to serve that law that is written in our hearts. So the law is good, and the Pharisees, by their witness to it, in their case the Mosaic law, they witness to that goodness. But at the same time, the law is not all there is, and this is, of course, the problem with the Pharisees. They thought that just doing the law was enough. And it's kind of childish, isn't it? You know, or even worse, adolescent. You know, it's sort of the attitude that says, well, I did that, well, you know, what else do you want, you know? The law is not all there is, and the Pharisees had settled for just observing the law, and our Lord had come to call them to something more. And if we hear him with a tone of frustration in his voice when speaking to the Pharisees, it's precisely because he saw in them something very good, but they were not taking it to, as we would say, the next level. They were not allowing themselves to be drawn to the lawgiver. They were allowing the law itself to keep them from the lawgiver. And again, we're all in danger of doing this when we just, you know, punch our ticket at Mass and say, well, I've fulfilled my obligation, now the rest of the day is mine. And allowing these obligations and the fulfillment of them to keep us from seeing the one to whom we should be ultimately devoted. So there should be that sympathy for the Pharisees, because we all fall into that trap. The law is not enough. And so also in our culture, the law is not enough. And one of the, I think, tragic things right now is that politics especially, and Supreme Court decisions. My father was appointed in 1986, and it just wasn't that big a deal. Because the court had not grown into such a controversial place, because the law had not overburdened our society the way it does now, and everything is politicized, and we're constantly worried about these things, which really should not be the only or even the most important dimension of our lives. Our lives as citizens, our lives as a society should be much broader. They should be filled out by many more associations, so that legal considerations are not the things that we're caught up with all the time. Political controversies shouldn't dominate our life. And the fact that they do is a sign of unhealth in our society. The law is not enough. There has to be something more. And that's also the cautionary tale to all in the legal profession. Because, and I live in the DC area, so I've seen it enough. The law has a way of consuming people's time and attention, and sucking people into just the entirety of the legal profession, instead of them giving their attention, first of all, to their faith, to their family. And of course, the stereotypes are there about lawyers being consumed by the law because, well, there's a certain truth to it. And it's a constant temptation. The devil doesn't tempt us with what is bad. He tempts us with what is good. If we see what is bad, and we see it clearly as bad, we're not going to be tempted because, well, that's bad. He dresses up what is bad to seem like something good, or he draws us away from the goods that are proper to us by goods that are not proper to us. And so for the lawyer, the doing good by way of the law, once it starts detracting from the faith, from the family, has ceased to be good. And all of a sudden, now there's a struggle. And there has to be that realization that the law is not enough. There has to be more there. There has to be that devotion to more foundational things. And it is the church and the family that are the most important. And they always go together, which is why in many of the persecuted, I don't think we can call it religious persecution right now. It's been harassment. We've been harassed. It's the family and the church that have been sort of on the receiving end. Because the church, first of all, is a family, and the family is the domestic church. these two things always go hand in hand.